Hi, my name is Sam, and this week at church we're going to start learning about a letter that Paul sent to a group of Christians in a place called Philippi. We thought it might be fun to take you back to when that church started with the help of our Lego. We hope you enjoy.
Paul and his friends were traveling and telling people about Jesus when one night Paul had a vision. He saw a man from Macedonia saying, "Come and help us." Paul woke up and immediately got ready to go because they were convinced God wanted them to go to Macedonia to tell the good news about Jesus.
They jumped on a ship and eventually arrived in an important city in Macedonia called Philippi. In chapter 16 of the book of Acts, we learn about 3 different people who were changed by the good news about Jesus in Philippi.
Paul and his friends had stayed there for some time when they went walking by the river outside the city on the Sabbath. They were looking for a place to pray and met some women who'd gathered there. One of the women was named Lydia. She was skillful at making purple goods, clothes, carpets, things like that. She'd learned about God and trusted him, but it wasn't until Paul and his friends came that she heard about Jesus. God opened her heart and she trusted in Jesus. She was baptized, and so was everyone in her house. She asked Paul and his friends to come and stay with her.
Next, Paul and his friends met a slave girl. She was controlled by a spirit that meant she could tell people what would happen in the future. She was also controlled by adults who used the spirit to make lots of money. As Paul and his friends walked by the river, this girl followed them day after day, shouting out that they were servants of the Most High God, who would tell the way of salvation. Eventually, the Bible tells us, Paul was really annoyed with the spirit and all the shouting. In God's powerful name, he told the spirit to leave, and it did. The girl was free of the spirit, but the people who made money from the girl were very angry. They dragged them in front of the judges. Paul and his friend Silas were beaten with rods and put in prison.
That was the day they met the third person who was changed by the gospel at Philippi. He was in charge of the jail. When Paul and Silas arrived, he treated them roughly and locked them in the most secure part of the jail. That night, something amazing happened. Paul and Silas had been beaten, they were chained up, but they weren't complaining. They weren't even sleeping. They were singing songs of praise and praying to God. All the other prisoners were listening to them. Then there was a big earthquake. All the doors were opened and everyone's chains fell off. When the jailer woke up and saw what had happened, he thought his life was over. Everyone had escaped. It was a disaster. Then he heard Paul's voice cry out, "Don't worry, we're all still here." The jailer rushed in with lights and asked Paul and Silas what he needed to do to be saved. They said, "Believe in Jesus and you'll be saved." He took them to his house. They told everyone about Jesus, and everybody in his house trusted Jesus and was baptized. Paul and Silas were released from prison the next day after the judges came and apologized to them. The judges also asked Paul and Silas to leave the city. So they went and said goodbye to their friends at Lydia's house, and they continued on their journey.
You see, God started the church at Philippi. He sent Paul a vision. He changed people's life with the good news about Jesus. Years later, Paul was sitting in another prison, and he was thinking about his friends in Philippi. So he wrote them a letter. He thanked God for their partnership in the gospel from the very first day.
Today in Sydney, long after Paul's trip to Philippi and the letter he wrote to his friends there, we have that same good news about Jesus. It can change our lives too. And just like Paul, even though we can't be with our friends in person at the moment, we can be gospel partners too. We can pray, we can send letters, we can make phone calls to friends, to family, to missionaries all around the world. Why don't you take time after service to thank God for the power of the gospel and to think about how you can express gospel partnership in your home this week?